Hi, it's a dark, gloomy, threatening day. Can't think of anything better than to study Kohelet, to read the book of Ecclesiastes. So last week we had our introduction, and it purports to be written by King Solomon, who calls himself Kohelet, the assembler, either the assembler of people or the assembler of Proverbs. And what we really know is that this was ultimately written 700 years after the time of King Solomon. And why did he attribute it to Solomon, to Kohelet, to the king of Jerusalem, who was smarter and richer than anyone? Because either it was a way to get his book published. If the guy's name was Murray, no chance. If the guy's name was Solomon ben David, he's got a shot. That's a possibility. Or it's historical fiction, and it's to put us into the mindset of a man who purports to be Solomon. So we're going to dive into chapter 2, and there's some very interesting outside things that we want to look at as well. So you remember last week the whole point was we are going to examine wisdom. What happens if you study and if you devote your mind to learning? What will you get out of this? And ultimately, we find that he said it's not going to get you anywhere. Getting your PhD from Harvard, there's nothing that's going to come of it. So now he's going to take a different position this week, and we're going to see what he has to say. So we're in chapter 2, the book of Ecclesiastes. Amarti ani belibi, I said to myself, I said in my heart, Lechana anascha besimcha, I will treat you to merriment. Ure'ei betuv, vehine gam hu havel. He said, okay, we tried the realm of learning and of knowledge. He said, now we're going to try a different experiment. The hell with that. Let's see about pleasure, about having fun. Maybe that's what life is all about. And before he even goes into the experiment, into the detail, he tells us the result. This too, I found, was futile. And remember, the word havel, we said last week, one translation was its breath, its merest breath. You breathe out the smoke on a cold day, you see the vapor, and then it's gone. That's all that good times are going to be good for. Okay, so verse 2, Lischok amarti meholal, of revelry, or schok could be laughter. Amarti mehulal, it's madness. Forget about it. V'lesimcha mazo asa, and of happiness or joy or of merriment, what good is that? Okay, now we're going to come to verse 3, and there's a couple of interesting things we need to look at in verse 3. So he says, Tarti belibi, I ventured to, in my heart, limshoch bayayin et bisari. I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly. Okay, so in other words, he said, instead of hanging out at Harvard, taking advanced courses, I'm going to hang out at the local bar, and I'm going to see what that's going to bring me. Now, the first thing that's interesting is it says here, limshoch bayayin. Limshoch bayayin. Yayin, we know, is wine. Limshoch, to pull, to follow, something moshech, which grabs us, which pulls us. So he seems to be saying, I'm going to follow wherever wine leads me. And here's what I want to show you, right? You've got the word lim shoch, right? The lamed at the beginning, the infinitive to, and then the three-letter root, mosheach, which means to follow through, right? So I want to start drinking and see where that's going to take me and follow with that. But some people say that's sort of an awkward way of saying it. And they say maybe what happened here is the scribe made a mistake. We had a transposition of letters. And instead of the word lim shoch, it should have been lismoach. Look at the difference between these two words. The lamed is the same, then the mem and the shin get mixed up. Now, how does this happen? Imagine that a scribe, how does he work? He's got a copy of the text here, and he's got the parchment here. And so what's happening is he's poring over the parchment with his pen, and he's looking each letter or each word from the text. And he goes, okay, a lamed, a mem, a shin, a chet. And what happens is sometimes when you've been copying for hours, sometimes your brain works faster than the eye, than the hand. And so what was perhaps written in the text was lismoach, to enjoy wine, right? To make merry with wine. But, as he's saying in his brain, lamed, mem, lamed, samech, mem, shin, he hears the mem, and then he puts aside the scene, and he mixes it up. So there are some scholars who tell us that the real word, the obvious word, the word that would have made more sense is lismoach, right? Beyayin, to enjoy, to make merry with wine. But somehow he messed up and he wrote a word, limshoch. Now, later, when somebody read what he wrote on his parchment, they say, well, that doesn't seem like the obvious word, but I guess, I will follow through with, I will follow wine. So what's the real answer? We don't know. We don't have the copy of the original text. All we have is a copy of what he wrote. And then the next guy copied from him and perhaps copied that mistake. And the mistake gets generated over and over again until at some point, and again, mostly people who read this says it's in the Bible. Who am I to change this? But what happens is when we get to modernity and scholars say, that doesn't make any sense, and we don't know what the real answer was, but I could tell by looking at the word and the letters that it's possible the two middle letters got transposed. And they don't care the fact that it's the Bible. They're scholars whose job is not what is God telling us, but what does the book mean, right? And they say maybe this is a possibility. Now, are they ever going to then say, therefore, we have decided in the 19th century or the 20th century or the 21st century that we're going to change the book? They don't do that. What they do is they say, here's the text as it came down to us, and our theory is some scribe 1,000 years ago made a mistake. So you, the reader, you be aware of the received text, you be aware of the possible emendations. Okay? And so there we have that possibility. I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine. I ventured to follow after wine and see where that would lead me. Okay? Then listen to the next part. While letting my, to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly. So according to the text that we have, by drinking a lot of wine, it would be to grasp folly, and while letting my mind direct with wisdom to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in their few days of life under the heaven. Here we have another possibility, because listen, our text says, I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly. But Robert Alter, in his new translation of the Bible, he says, I sought in my heart to ply my body with wine, while my heart acted with wisdom, not grasping folly. The text that we have says, I'm going to drink and I'm going to embrace, I'm going to hold on to folly. And Alter says, I think that's a mistake. He says a better translation would be, I sought in my heart to ply my body with wine while my heart acted with wisdom, not grasping folly. The opposite of what our text says. Where does he come off with that? So first, let's look at the words. The word we have is le'echos, the top one, the le'echos, which means to grasp. But underneath that, you have what Alter thinks was the original text, the lo-echos, right? And not to grab onto. So the top, what we have in our text is to grasp folly. But Alter says no, it should be the lo-echos and not to grasp on to folly. Now, how did this mistake happen? The first mistake we saw was you mixed up two letters. This one, you should know that when scribes are writing, one kind of error is called dittography, like in ditto. Accidental, erroneous act of repeating a letter. So he's looking here, he's copying, and he repeats. After he wrote it, he forgot that he just wrote it, goes back and he copies it. Okay, but there's another kind of error called haplography, H-A-P-L-O, haplography, which is the accidental, erroneous act of skipping a letter. So in other words, what happened was that the scribe wanted to write the following, the lo achaz, and not grasp folly, but he said, I already wrote the aleph, and he forgot in the time that it takes to write and to look back, so he skips one of the alephs. And instead of one word, the le'echos, to grasp, it should have been the lo achaz, and not to grasp folly. So you see how the mistake could be made, right? That's the idea of what happened. Now, why does Alter think that makes better sense, not grasping folly? Because here's the picture. He said, I've studied at Harvard, didn't do me anything. Let me go down to the bar. Now, there are two possibilities here. I'm just going to get totally wasted until I don't know what's flying, right? And to grasp folly, to hold on to it, to embrace it. But Alter thinks that doesn't make good sense for somebody who's trying an experiment. I tried this, I don't like it. Let me try the opposite. But if I do the opposite as an experiment, I really need to have some of my brain, aware of watching me do what I'm doing. So the first way, the way the text reads, is to grasp folly, get wasted, have no clue who I am, what I did, where I am, any of that. Alter says that's not a good experiment. That what makes better sense is I'm going to go to the bar, I'm going to taste all the wines, I'm going to enjoy my palate, my stomach, my tongue, my brain. Everything is going to enjoy it, but I'm not going, while I'm doing this, I'm not going to embrace, to grab onto folly, meaning I'm not going to get wasted. I'm just going to try it out, taste it, and see the pleasures, the sensual pleasures involved with drinking, right? So you could see both possibilities, and again, you can clearly see from the letters how easy it is to repeat a letter or to drop a letter. We don't know which way it went, but ultimately, that's the story of what happened. Okay, so that's what he says he's going to do, to the end that I might learn which of the two, going to Harvard or going to the bar, was better for men to practice in their few days of life under heaven. So we're now on verse 4. Higdalti ma'asai, I multiplied my possessions. Baniti, and he says, and I decided not just to hang out at the bar, but I'm going to devote myself to material things. So what are the material things that he decides I want to check out, I want to enjoy, and find maybe that's what you should spend your life doing? So he says, Baniti li batim, I built myself houses. Remember, he's pretending to be Solomon, so he has the wherewithal to do that. And of course, there was this reputation of the palace of King Solomon. And this is a guy who has, an apartment in Manhattan. He's got a place out in the Hamptons. He's got a place in Palm Beach. Maybe he's even got a place on the Riviera, right? So that's the first thing that he does, to have houses all over that I can live in and enjoy. And then he says, Natati li karamim, and I planted for myself vineyards, right? So it wasn't just that I have these 4 places to live, but each place had some kind of incredible garden. And then he says, verse 5, Asiti li ganot ufardesim, I made for myself gardens, and a pardes is a grove. Now, here's something else that's interesting. You may know that in Hebrew, almost every word has a 3-letter root. Okay, and it's in some way we build on those 3 letters to make the words in Hebrew. Here we have the word pardes, which has 4 letters. What's that about? Well, we know that the word pardes was originally, and that's where we get the word paradise from, it was originally a Persian word. So in other words, somehow the Persian word pardes, or whatever the way you pronounced it in Persian, in Farsi, pardes was adopted by the Hebrew language, and it became part of it. So you can speak today of a pardes. There's a place in Israel called Pardes Chana, right? Many places like that. What originally was a Persian word became into the Hebrew language. Why is this important? Because of the following. The Jews didn't have a connection with Persian until the 6th, probably the 5th century BCE. And remember, Solomon lives in the 10th century BCE. So there's no way that King Solomon in the year 900 could have used the word pardes. It wasn't a part of biblical Hebrew. It only became part of Hebrew in the 5th century, 4th century BCE, and here it's probably being used by the author in the 3rd century BCE, right? It's like if you opened up Shakespeare, or what you thought was Shakespeare, and you read a word, nuclear, which only comes, I assume, in the 20th century, or some other word which is, Shakespeare never would have heard about or known about or could have used, right, would tell you this couldn't have been written by Shakespeare. So the use of the word pardes here in verse 5 tells us that Solomon couldn't have written this section. Okay, so I made for myself gardens and groves, v'natati bahem eitz kol peri, and I planted every kind of fruit tree. Verse 6, asiti li brechot mayim, I made pools of water. So he builds himself not only all these houses, incredible, beautiful gardens, but magnificent swimming pools in all of the places, and jacuzzis, you could bet. Lahashkot mehem ya'ar tzomeach eitzim. And he had underground sprinkling systems put in. And the idea is that either in Solomon's day or even in the 3rd century BCE, for anybody to put in an underground sprinkling system, only the richest person could do that. And the richest person who did that would then have, because of the irrigation, would have green, beautiful, luscious gardens and trees at a time, especially during the summer, when everybody else had barren landscape. Verse 7, Kaniti avadim ushfachot uvnei bait hayali. I acquired for myself servants, male and female, and household staff, butlers, maids, all sorts of people working for me. Gam mikne bakar vatzon harbe hayali. Also, incredible flocks and herds of cattle and sheep. All right, so if you imagine that back in those days, this was the main, somebody who was a farmer, needed to have many, many flocks of sheep and of cattle. What would be the equivalent today? Right? Somebody who had many, many different franchises and stores. Okay, Mikol shahayu lefanai b'Yerushalayim, more than anybody else had in all of Jerusalem. I was the richest guy, and I acquired the most property and things more than anybody else. Verse 8, Kanasti li gam kesef v'zahav. I also collected silver and gold. Okay, so I had an incredible amount of money in the bank, as well as jewels and precious metals. Uskulat malachim v'hamidinot. Right, all of these kinds of treasures of kings and provinces. Asiti li sharim v'sharot. I also acquired sharim, singers, and sharot, female and male singers. I would want to have live concerts. These people worked for me. Right? So today, what would be the equivalent? You'd have boom boxes and you'd have the ultimate stereo system. V'ta'anugot b'nei adam shida v'shidot. And I also had the luxuries of commoners, coffers and coffers of them. That word shida, translated here as coffers, is an interesting one, and it is what we call in Greek, we use the term a hapax legomenon. Hapax legomenon is Greek for occurs one time. In other words, this word shida, this is the only time the word shida appears in the entire Bible. Here's the problem. If we have a word that appears many times, we can learn its meaning by its use in context. But where the word appears only once, you can't compare it. You have no idea what the word means, and you can't say, well, we know what it means there, it must mean the same thing here. But we only have one time. Therefore, we're stuck. So what do? Well, what scholars in this case did is they said in biblical times, meaning from, let's say, 1200 BCE down to 200 BCE, we don't know what the word shida means. But in Rabbinic Hebrew, in the Mishnah, which the Mishnah is put together around the year 200 CE, we do know from context and from other meanings that a shida is sort of a box, a coffer in which you keep treasures. So what do? The scholars say, all right, we don't know what, technically, we actually don't know what the word meant in the Bible, but we do know what the word meant in the Mishnah. We're going to take a chance that the word didn't change in 500 years. So if it means, we're sure that it means a coffer in the Mishnah, we're assuming the word means the same thing in the Bible. Are they right? We don't know. It's a guess, which is why, in a good translation, in the footnote, they tell you the Hebrew shida occurs only here in the Bible. In the Mishnah, it designates a kind of chest. So it's their way of saying, we don't know. It's our best guess. Maybe somebody will dig up something in the future and we'll be able to figure it out for sure. Okay, verse 9. Ve'gadalti ve'hosafti mikol shahaya lefanai beYerushalayim. I gained more wealth than anyone ever before me in Jerusalem. Af chachmati amda li. In addition, my wisdom remained with me. In other words, even though I tried this second experiment, material possessions and physical pleasures, nevertheless, I never lost that PhD that I got from Harvard, meaning that I was able to analyze these two different lifestyles. By the way, I got to tell you, there's another possibility. Shida, instead of it being a coffer, a treasure based on what the Mishnah says, another scholar said, I think that it may be a word for a woman. Why does he come up with this? There could be, linguistic reasons, but from the content, he said, look at all the things that he claims to have enjoyed, wine and then these material things. Wouldn't it make sense for the guy to have said, and I also slept with as many women as I possibly could? but he doesn't mention women or sex at all. So some scholars say the obvious thing that he's left out is maybe that's what shida means, and that's where he came up with it. But a lot of people don't agree with that. By the way, the question, what happened to physical pleasures? What happened to sex? Right? Why isn't that there? And you could answer, well, it's a religious book. It's a book maybe in order to get it put into the Bible. He couldn't say a terrible thing like that. We don't really know. Okay? So it brings us to verse 10. V'chol asher sha'alu einai. I withheld from my eyes nothing. V'lo atzalti mehem. Anything I saw, I did. I grabbed. I tried. Okay? So you can use your imagination. He doesn't have to be explicit about it. Lo manati et libi. I didn't prevent my heart, mikol simcha, from any kind of enjoyment or happiness or pleasure. Ki libi sameach mikol amali. So that my heart rejoiced in all the things that I had worked for and acquired and accomplished. V'zeh haya chelki mikol amali. And that was all I got out of my wealth. Okay? Verse 11. Ufaniti ani bechol ma'asai she'asu yadai. Then my thoughts turned to all the fortune my hands had built up. Uva amal she'amalti la'asot. To the wealth I had acquired and won. So after he builds all his houses, all his gardens and treasures, and tries everything out, then he stops and he thinks and he now analyzes it and he evaluates, and what does he come up to? V'hinei hakol hevel ureut ruach. And it was all mere breath and hurting the wind. So in other words, after he enjoyed all these things, he stopped, he thought about it, and he said, am I better off because of all of those things? He said, it's a waste of time. It's like trying to capture the wind. You can't do it. Ve'ein yitron tachat hashamesh. There's no real value for that under the sun. I felt good while I was doing it, but the next day it was meaningless to me. I had nothing to show for the money I spent, all the effort that I put in. So verse 12. Ufaniti ani lirot chokhmah. For what will the man be like who will succeed, the one who is ruling over what was built up long ago? Lirot chokhmah v'holelot v'sichlut ki meh ha'adam sheyavo acharei hamelech. After I'm gone, is all these things that I learned and I got and I did, is that going to help the next guy who's in my place? He's going to be no better off for all the experimenting that I did. Et asher kavar asuhu. Verse 13. Vera'iti ani sheyesh yitron lechachma min hasichlut kitron haor min hachoshech. Now this sounds a little bit like a proverb, and in our book here they almost write it off like it's a indented proverb. Wisdom is superior to folly, as light is superior to darkness. So he's already told us last week what good was getting my PhD at Harvard. What did it do me? So he tries something else. But now he comes back and he says, but to tell you the truth, being stupid, right, and quitting, before you got your high school diploma, that's no good either. Notice, by the way, and throughout the book, that Kohelet, the author of Kohelet, is going to go back and forth because he thinks something, he figures it out, and then he reconsiders, and he continues to go back and forth with this. Okay, so he says, "I thought wisdom was it. It's not it. But you know what? On the other hand, better to be smart than to be ignorant." Verse 14. Hechacham einav berosho, v'hakasil b'choshech holech. A wise man has his eyes in his head, whereas a fool walks in darkness. Okay, the continuation, the end of the proverb. V'yadati gamani shemikre echad yikre et kulam. But I also realized that even though, listen to this, even though it's better to be intelligent than it is to be ignorant, the same thing is ultimately going to happen to the wise man and to the fool. Okay, so you could say, so why bother? He says, because being ignorant and not knowing where you're going, what's happening. But if you think being intelligent is the secret to success, forget about that too. So it's not like it's A or B. We're somewhere in the middle, and we're going to continue to go back and forth, or at least Kohelet is going to continue. All right, 15. V'amarti ani belibi. We've seen this phrase again and again. And I said to myself, here they translate, so I reflected, Kemikre hakasil gamani yikreni. The fate of the fool is also destined for me. V'lama chachamti ani. And so why bother to be good? Why bother to be smart? Ani az yoter. V'dibarti bilimi shegam zeh hevel. The fate of the fool is also destined to me. What advantage then have I been wise? And I came to the conclusion that too was futile. He's going back and forth. He's like a ping pong ball. Wisdom, it's no good. Material things, that's no good. Better to be smart. But you're going to die and you're going to be no better off than the fool. So what do we get? It's not like we have somebody who knows the answer and wants to give us the secret. What we have is somebody who is searching, somebody who's desperate to figure it out. And Monday he figures this, and by Tuesday he realizes that's not the answer. And on Wednesday he comes up with something else, and then that's not the answer either. So we see somebody, not the source of all wisdom, who wants to give us this gift. We watch almost sadly of this man who's in search and can't find the answer. He's ping-ponging back and forth. 16. Ki ein zichron lechacham im hakasil le'olam. That after the wise man is gone and after the fool is gone, nobody remembers them or who they were or what their struggles were. B'shekvar hayamim abayim hakol nishkach. At the end of time, everybody and everything will be forgotten. V'ech yamut hechacham im hakasil. Alas, the wise man dies just like the fool. Right? So, we find out that there are people who smoke and live to be 100, and there are people who decide, who are joggers and who run every single day and die of a heart attack at the age of 40. Go figure it out. Right? There's no sense to the way things work. Verse 17, V'saneti et hachayim. And because of that, I hated life. I hated that that's the way it is in life. Ki ra alai hama'aseh. I was distressed by all that goes on under the sun. Shene'asa tachat hashamesh. Ki hakol hevel ureut ruach. Because it's all breath, and it's gone, and it's hurting, running after the wind. 18. V'saneti ani et kol amalai. I loathed all the wealth that I was gaining under the sun. Sha'ani amel tachat hashamesh. Sha'ani chenu la'adam she'yeh acharai. Think about this. I worked hard my whole life, and 18 hours a day to acquire all the things, and I'm going to die, and my kids are going to get it. And what did they get? What did they ever do to deserve all the things that I worked so hard for and that I got no joy out of? That's not fair. If, by the way, although it's not stated here, but if we're meant to think this is King Solomon who's talking, who was Solomon's son? Rechavam, who was a pretty stupid young man who took over after Solomon and blew it because he so heavily taxed the kingdom. There was a rebellion, and ultimately the 10 tribes broke away from the kingdom, and they created Israel in the north, and Rehoboam was left only with the tribe of Judah in the south. So it's almost like Solomon, right, is saying, my son's an idiot, and I'm going to give him this fortune, and look what he's going to do with it. 19. Umi odea hechacham yihye o sachal v'yishlot b'chol amali sha'amalti v'shechachamti tachal hashamash gam zeh hevel. Who knows whether he will be wise or foolish, and he will control all the wealth that I gain by toil and wisdom under the sun. That too is breath. It's futile. Verse 20. V'sakoti ani liyaesh et libi. So I came to view with despair all the gains that I had made. Al kol ma ha'amel sha'amalti tachat hashamesh, under the sun. Verse 21. Ki yesh adam, there is a man, sha'amalo b'chakma v'dat uv'kisharon. Sometimes there's a person whose fortune was made with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, and what happens? Ula adam shelo amal bo yitnenu chelko. And he's going to have to give it over to somebody who didn't deserve it, who didn't work for it, doesn't know how to enjoy it or to deal with it. Gam zeh hevel v'ra'ah rabah. This too is futile and a grave evil. Verse 22. Ki meh hoveh adam bechol amalo uvara'ayon libo. Right? And he says, what does a man get for all the toiling and worrying he does under the sun? Shehu amel tachat hashamesh. 23. Ki kol yamav machovim vaka'as inyano. This is an incredible statement, maybe a sign of real depression, clinical depression. All his days and his thoughts are grief and heartache. And even at night, his mind has no respite. Gam balayla hu lo shachav. He can't sleep at night. Gam zeh hevel hu. In thinking about all the work that he did and the meaningless of it, and the fact that somebody who's going to follow him, who didn't work and didn't deserve, going to get it all, what's the point? Verse 24. Ein tov ba'adam. Now, this is a very famous line, very important, because after ping-ponging back and forth, Kohelet tells us the following. Okay, I tried this, no good. I tried that, that's no good. And then he says, Ein tov ba'adam. There is nothing better, nothing worthwhile, nothing good, sheyochal, for a man to do, except to yochal v'shata v'hera et nafsho tov ba'amalo. Nothing for him to do but eat, drink, and be merry. Very famous line. Did you know it comes from Ecclesiastes? But there's part of the line that's missing. What we're all familiar with is the line that says, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die. That's not here. That's not part of what Kohelet said. Kohelet simply said, eat, drink, and be merry, period. In other words, let's see what Kohelet said, and then let's figure out that famous line. What Kohelet is basically saying is, I'm not renouncing material things. He said, what I've come to the conclusion is, if you've got something before you, enjoy it while you can. That's all that I can tell. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but for today, you might as well eat and drink and be merry today. Now, Kohelet didn't say, because tomorrow you're going to die. He said, who knows what's going to be tomorrow? And if God gave it to you, you might as well enjoy it. Right? But don't think that's what life is all about. Now, let's go back for a second. What about eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die? The second half actually also comes from the Bible, but not from here. The second half of that famous phrase, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die, for tomorrow we shall die, comes from Isaiah chapter 22, verse 13. It was around the year 700 BCE, and God, through the prophet, tells the people, the Assyrians are going to get you. You better wise up. You better repent, or else I'm going to let them get you. And the people, instead of repenting, instead of wising up, what did the people do? The people said, you know what? Since the Assyrians are coming tomorrow, today we might as well, enjoy. So there's two separate things. In Isaiah, it's, we're all going to be dead, therefore we might as well splurge today. And God is not happy about that approach. What Kohelet is saying is different. Kohelet is saying, I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know that there are things that God created in the world that bring me joy and pleasure. What I'm going to do is enjoy them when they come to me. Instead of saying, I'm going to work hard my whole life, and then I'm going to retire early, and I'm going to live the incredible life in retirement. And of course, we all know how that story ends. The guy dies of a heart attack before he retires. So what Kohelet is saying is, don't put it off. Enjoy things today. But he's also not saying you should forget about your job, forget about anything else. You should just get wasted. He's not saying that. So again, if you're looking for this very clear, crystal clear, idea, Kohelet can't help you. He's tried this, he's tried that. He's coming somewhere in the middle. He's basically saying, God created these things, we should enjoy them when they come to us and not put them off. But on the other hand, we shouldn't say, that's all that you should do in life. You live like that, you're gonna die. And that's wrong also. Okay, so we continue with verse 24. He says, even that, I noted, comes from God. Ra'iti ani ki miyad ha'elohim God gave me all the material things and the physical pleasures. It's not that they're out there and I grabbed them. God wanted me to have them. Okay, so this is not an ascetic who says you shouldn't mess around with these things. These things came to you because God created wine to taste good. And he wants you to taste wine. And if you decide to be a Nazirite and never drink wine, in a sense, you're spitting in God's face. But on the other hand, don't become a person who spends his whole time getting drunk on wine. Okay, so there's this nuance in the middle. Okay? And by the way, as we said last week, the name for God is Elohim. There is a God. God is up there. God is very distant. God is not personal. He's not the Adonai that Tevye could talk to and beg from or could argue with. Elohim is this impersonal God. And it's part of God's plan, which we'll never figure out, that there are good things in life. So you might as well enjoy them. That was part of God's plan. But why do bad things happen to good people? And we don't know. We can't know. All right, 25. Ki mi yochal u'mi yachush chutz mimeni. If I don't eat and drink, who's going to do it? Why is there good food and good drink on earth if not for us to enjoy? Okay, God could have simply given us manna, which is like tofu, no taste, just nutrients, and that's it. 26, last verse. Kila Adam shetov lefanav. To the man, namely, who pleases God, he has given the wisdom and shrewdness to enjoy himself. Kila Adam shetov lefanav, Natan, God gave chokhmah v'da'at v'simcha. God gave pleasure to us. It's part of God's plan. V'lachotei, and to him who displeases God, he has given the urge to gather and amass only for handing on to one who is pleasing to God. For the sinner, right, God will have the sinner gather and acquire all these things, which will ultimately fall into the hand of some other guy who didn't work hard to achieve it. Gamze hevel. This too is futile. It's breath, ureut ruach, and it's pursuit of the wind. Okay, so we see a little bit about the nuances of the life that Kohelet comes up with, but we also find today this positive notion. I don't know why it is. God created good things. Enjoy them when they come to you. Don't push them away. On the other hand, don't think that that's what life is all about. Just getting wasted and just acquiring material possessions. It's a little bit more complex than that. All right? I'll see you next time.